So I'm going to start off, much like many of you out there, I'm also wondering why I'm up here. There's a saying that says that life's too short to make all the mistakes yourself, and so you should learn from others, and I think that's the reason why I'm here. So that's a very big vision, and I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not yet successful. But what I want to do is I want to start to talk to you about my journey, because this has been a 7-year journey to get to where I am. And a lot of people are talking about how can we close and have a better relationship with nature. And how do we, what the big focus that we're doing is we're saying the future of food is medicine. And the future of medicine is food. So if we look at in Manitoba, how can we start diversifying our economy? I want to start out by thanking very much a couple of people that came around someone's kitchen table and said, what would it look like if we were to create a hog industry? How we could create a bunch of hog barns, you know, the whole supply chain, making our feed. And High Life successfully sold a good portion or most of their company for $500 million. So it is possible. So that all of a sudden put Manitoba on the map. Internationally as one of the largest places and where emerging economies like China, Japan, and Asian markets can get animal-based protein. Now, we have also then competing things. We have things like Beyond the Meat Burger. And so I'm not a fan of promoting disinformation, but on Facebook, which is a source of information, they're saying that there's only 5 ingredients that are different in terms of flavor from dog food. And so the perception to Facebook users are all of a sudden, wait a minute. Then they start looking into it more. And we start looking at things like Beyond the Meat Burger, which are highly processed. And I think that's where we're all starting to, almost the pendulum is swinging too far. And so instead of overly processed, I want to thank the presenter before us, which is really, I think, everyone is kind of figuring out where that middle ground is. And so that middle ground for me, I want to coin it here, and please share it and tweet about it, Segan. So eating vegan, but also you need some animal protein. And so for Manitoba, that's where we felt that fish could really fit in. So we're seeing that fish actually is being shut down in terms of both coasts and internationally. A lot of the caged tanks are creating so much effluent that they're kind of stifling off the coastal plain, the coastlines, and creating a lot of environmental damage. Trudeau, in his wisdom, are shutting down all the fish farms in BC. Guess what we have in Manitoba? Amazing power. And if you look at the supply chain, we can actually own the supply chain in Manitoba. So with the fish, we can do a hatchery here. We can actually get access to things like camomile, flaxseed, hemp seeds. We can create plant-based fish feeds where we can begin all the way from beginning to end, have enormously healthy fish. All of that can be done here. We have amazing cheap hydro. And the other thing that people don't realize is under St. Francis Xavier and other areas, a lot of farmers deal with salinity. Guess what our char like? We have glacial salt water. So people buy bottles of water from glaciers, and it's just like, yeah, that's nothing. We're feeding our fish glacial salt water. That means that there's no microplastics, and that water hasn't been touched since there was glaciers. And a lot of people don't realize when the glaciers receded, they left behind gifts, and that's our freshwater aquifers and our saltwater aquifers. So it's taking us a lot of time to be able to actually develop this system. So if we're going to be really pushing the environmental side of it, then what is the business of Myera? And I want to talk about, there's a lot of terms out there, restorative agriculture, regenerative agriculture. So it goes against conventional business wisdom. Because a business will say, you pick what you do, you focus on it, and you do it well. Well, in my particular case, I wanted to do fish farming. So I start with aquaculture, the blue one. But fish are like you and I, and if you feed them, they kind of pee and poo. And so you're like, if I'm going to have an environmental label, then I have to take accountability for, well, the pee and the poo. So the organic liquids, in the summertime, that's relatively easy. So we're working with Roberta, a lot of other people, a lot of farmers to grow wild rice. And so in using a flat piece of land, we can flood it, we can then grow wild rice. But the part of regenerative agriculture when you have animals is the tricky part. So I went up to my fish and I said, hey fish, how's it going? Can you do me a favor? Because in the wintertime, I can't grow wild rice. Can you hold your pea until the spring? It didn't go over well. So all of a sudden you have to figure out, what do you do with the organic liquids in the winter? And that was one of the biggest problems I had, is that if you now do algae like you saw in the video, you're dealing with a building, you're dealing with, and it has to be a high commodity because you're heating the place, you have staff. So now all of a sudden I have a solution for the pea. So in the summer, I can grow wild rice, and in the winter, I can grow algae and different aquatic species. So I'm from Brandon. I actually grew up here. I went to Brandon University, and I blame a lot of the professors for putting these ideas in my heads here. So on one hand, I encourage you to go to the university, do innovative things, but then if you're raising a wife and kid, you have bills to pay, don't do it. So in order to be able to balance an ecosystem, what you see there is that now I've kind of figured out the liquid side. The solid side was also a little bit tricky. And so how do you collect? Because, I went back to the fish again, and I'm like, hey, fish, I'm back. And now that we've solved this liquid problem, can you hold the solids? And they're like, Bruce, we've talked about this. If you feed me, we will make it. And I'm like, okay. Now all of a sudden we have to add to our business model. So again, our primary product is a fish. Secondary is a value add with the liquids, and the third is the solids. So rather than having a big piece of equipment, we actually said, what's around us that we can use? And so access to ag waste, such as oat hulls or wild rice stalks, we actually used a filtration system. So we filter the fish poo, if you will, through this ag waste, and allows us to create a soilless soil. Now in that soilless soil, we can grow anything that we would like. My first career and the company that I own is a software company, and we deliver healthcare software, predominantly pregnant women to kindergarten to grade 12 in 56 First Nations. Most of those children suffer from lack of nutrition because they don't have access to adequate food. This is where all this idea came from. So because of that, the healer that you saw in there, I said, if we're gonna grow a food in a greenhouse in Manitoba, it has to be worth something. So what could we grow that we could label as a traditional medicine? And we all talk about, what does Indigenous reconciliation look like? Honestly, it looks like every other community. They just want to find a way to participate in the economy, feed their kids, have a healthy outlook, and have a sense of security. That's it. So this, when I went and I said, now we have soilless soil, what could we do with it? So one of the things that we started to grow and looking at are things like purple carrots and purple potatoes. So I forgot to move some slides. I'll pause for a second, just do this one here. So just for everyone really quickly, is that when I talk about the fish has 4 components. So we have a fish hatchery, so that's where we actually create the fish eggs, the brood stock. Then the 2-inch fish go to a fish grow-out farm, kind of like a cow-calf operation or a sow operation. And then the value-added processing. So that's where we can actually take the fish and turn it into shrink-wrap packages on farm. And then the functional feeds development, all of this can be done in Manitoba. The point I want to make here is that Red River College got over $30 million in automation. Most of the investors I talk with say, well, let's not invest in automation. Let's start with, knives to be able to head and gut the fish. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, because these kids are coming out who have learned how to use automation, and we're going to say, no, for the first couple of years, here's a knife. And so when they don't show up to work, we're going to call them millennials, right? And it's actually our responsibility to make sure that when we create these organizations, they're automation ready almost. And it's just another layer of complexity. But if we don't do that, then our youth aren't going to actually be engaged in working with us. So we're working on a next-gen supercluster to pull these pieces together on the fish side. And that also goes for the wild rice and the greenhouse side as well. This slide here just gives you a sense of the scale of it. So each one of those modules that you see is 860 metric tons. And so just for a quick reference for you, 860 tons is 1 semi a week to Loblaws. But to your community, that's 30 jobs. So if we have 2 modules, that's 2 semi a weeks for Loblaws. That's 60 jobs for a rural municipality. So for a rural municipality, what's 60 jobs? That's a lot of youth staying in your community. And what is 2 semis a week to Loblaws? It's nothing. So this is where, when we're looking at rural economy, rural diversification, and each one of these modules, and again, I've already asked the fish, they won't hold it, so we have to deal with the fish liquids and we have to deal with the fish solids. That allows us to have that balance. So I'm going to bring this back to where I started off with, where I was thanking the hog industry. The other thing the hog industry let us know as well is that our rivers and lakes have a carrying capacity. So if we, just imagine in your head, if you can think of a hog barn, but stack the pigs. The image doesn't really work. But if you have 8 feet of water, imagine stacked fish, because it's quite easy. So from a farm perspective, your ability to grow animal protein is enormously dense. And Arctic char, because if you lived underneath like 8 feet of ice, you'd like to cuddle. So in order to keep them healthy, they love to cuddle. And so the more you stock them, the more actually healthy they are, the quicker they grow. Whereas salmon, you can't stock them, or trout, you can't stock them very dense. So we now know from the hog industry that our carrying capacities, our lakes and rivers, would have a tough time to accept all of our fish waste. That's why we have to do something with the liquids in the summer and the winter, and the solids as well. So this kind of gives you an idea for each one of those modules. So the first kind of year 1 is where we're at, and then year 2, what we're looking at is about 10 million a year. So for a rural municipality, again, 1 module is 860 metric tons. That's 1 semi a week to Costco Loblaws, but the revenue is $10 million with an EBITDA around 30%. That's not bad. Now we're working with a farmer who has saltwater issues. So we can bring up from the well saltwater, our fish provide nutrients in it, and then we can release that water, and we have technology to take the salt out. So we work with farmers, and now they have an organic source of fertilizer that they can use for their traditional croppings in dry years, and we jointly are helping farmers to deal with climate change in Manitoba. This is an example of machine learning and AI, and again, I'm up here because I've learned all the mistakes and I've paid for them, but we've spent an enormous amount of money trying to figure out what makes a healthy fish. So we did research projects with the University of Manitoba, and it turns out if you put fish on a treadmill for 2 hours a day, that converts from a metabolomics perspective the best feed to white muscle recruitment. If the water's too slow, it puts on red muscle, and we can't sell red muscle. And when you cook a fish and there's that gray stuff that you throw out, you're wasting red muscle. So by using machine learning and AI, we actually biomimic the photo period, the temperature, and the exercise that they would have. Because it turns out after you work out for 20 minutes, you want to go talk to Sally or say hi to Frank, or, the fish actually don't like the water to be too fast. And anything faster than that, you're paying Manitoba Hydro to move water. And if you move them more than the recruitment of the muscle, then you're feeding them to actually swim against the current that you're paying. So for each 860 metric ton model, 2.8 million in cost of goods sold is what we save. So a lot of people talk about machine learning and AI and software, but I want to give you a real example of how you can use it. So I was really lucky. I own a software company, and so I just said, I just tasked my guys. I'm like, just do it. And I know that not everyone in the audience has that gift, but this is easy for me. But what is more I'm trying to come across is that I just use this for fish. And so machine learning and AI, I encourage you, knock on the door of Red River, ACC, Brandon University, and work with them to figure out how that can help your operations as well. Because here's just a very clear use case of it. The St. Francis Xavier Community Innovation Campus, that's where we want to be able to work with farmers, with industry, and with universities to be able to train people to grow fish, to be able to harvest the liquids in the winter for algae, wild rice in the summer, and then create the soilless soil for our greenhouses. This is it's aptly yellow. This talks about all the fish liquids, if you will. So we grow algae in the summertime, wild rice in the summertime, algae in the wintertime, and then we have the value-added processing, and we really want to get into that nutraceutical market. Because as Manitoba, we need to start shifting away so that we have a balance between commodities and high-value products. So that's where the focus on the medicine is. Here's just an example where we don't have to invent everything. Here's an off-the-shelf robot from China or an Asian country that has lots of wild rice paddies. And so it can find kind of weeds and pull them out. Thank you. This is the wild rice. We're working with floating leaf wild rice. We're gonna have 6 brands, but we're gonna brand them. I'm Cree Métis, so go with whatever marketing you can. And so we are working with our healers to make sure that we have that kind of certified indigenous kind of packaging. And that allows us to partner with somebody that's already in the field, has already those market spaces, a lot of the issues that were brought up before, but you don't have to do this alone. And so the relationship with Floating Leaf and Shoal Lake Wild Rice, those types of partnerships, they keep wind in your sails. So here we're gonna have six lines of products in a very short period of time. And as we grow and expand our farms, we can just bring more wild rice into that supply chain. This is actually what our soilless soil looks like. Sorry, I left this to the last slide. So here's an example of 10 acres of strawberries. But when I worked with my healer, I said I wanted to be able to have something where I can create a traditional medicine. And in indigenous medicine, the roots of the strawberries can prevent heart attacks. So basically, the strawberries cover your cost of goods sold, but then we can collect those roots, grind them into powders at the Richardson Center for Functional Foods and Nutraceuticals, and now you have food as medicine and medicine as food. This is a great way you can see in the 3 things before where we just made it simple. You cut it, spread it, and put it in, and that's what can be used for robots. My last slide here is this is what kids want to do. If you can get them to pick those strawberries in year 1 and year 2 as a college program, but we either make sure we design these things so that it's robotic friendly, because in year 2 and year 3 of their college university, they want to train those robots how to pick those strawberries. So that's kind of my last comment, is that we have to be future ready. And it's complex, it's difficult. But I think Manitoba's on the cusp of really being able to be that future of food as medicine and medicine as food kind of notion that's going on. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Pretty simple question, but the footprint of one module, what does that look like?
About 60 by 200, 60 feet wide by 200.